Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're doing something just a little bit different. We are going to put on our hard hats and actually act as modern civil engineers reviewing a completely fascinating 14th century building code. We're looking back in time to uncover how historical urban planning was, well, surprisingly advanced and, honestly, deeply relevant to exactly how we build our cities today.
So how did a 14th century judge enforce what we would essentially consider modern zoning laws? It sounds like a total contradiction, right? Well, we are going to see exactly how these historical neighborhood disputes were resolved using surprisingly modern structural standards. Because, it wasn't just about petty arguments over property lines, it was actually about complex engineering, structural integrity, and public health.
So our primary case file today is this amazing Maliki jurisprudence manual on urban construction damage. It's titled The Declaration of Building Rulings, and it was written by a man named Ibn Al-Rami. You can think of this document as essentially a medieval handbook for resolving urban conflict, but purely through an engineering lens.
To keep us on track, here's our site inspection checklist for today. We're going to run through the briefing, structural assessment and shared walls, environmental and zoning compliance, privacy as a building code, and finally wrap up with the final code.
Okay, Section 1, the briefing. Let's establish our ground rules.
Let's meet our inspector, Ibn Al-Rami. Now, he wasn't just a judge sitting in some stuffy courtroom, he was actually an expert master builder in 14th century Tunis. When neighbors fought over a new window or a crumbling wall, he was literally the guy they called. He applied strict, almost ruthless technical observations to these disputes, relying heavily on local custom and his own deep, practical knowledge of construction.
And this perfectly illustrates how we can bridge the gap between his time and ours. Ibn al-Rami didn't use our modern numbers. Instead, he used qualitative metrics, things like old versus new, or visible versus hidden. But what's really cool is how easily we can translate his binary classifications directly into our modern engineering risk assessments of high, medium, and low severity. It just shows how incredibly rigorous his thought process actually was.
Moving right along to Section 2, structural assessment and shared walls.
Getting to the foundation of our inspection, putting unauthorized weight on a shared wall, or digging a drainage pit that causes moisture were treated as high-risk structural failures. If you excavated a latrine right next to your neighbor's foundation, Ibn al-Rami assessed the physical risk. If it weakened the wall, boom, it was a high-risk violation that had to be stopped immediately. It's exactly like a modern city inspector enforcing load-bearing codes today.
The absolute crucial point comes down to this traditional legal precedent. Benefiting from property is restricted by not nullifying the neighbor's benefit or weakening their property. Meaning your property rights stop the absolute second your structural modifications threaten the physical safety or the foundational integrity of your neighbor's home. You simply don't have the right to accidentally collapse the house next door just to expand your living room.
We can see this in action in the original text, which details strict rulings on whether a neighbor can anchor wooden beams into a shared wall. This wasn't just petty squabbling between neighbors, it was a serious matter of preventing a catastrophic building collapse. Without mutual agreement and his solid engineering assurance that the wall could handle that extra structural load, the action was totally prohibited.
Section 3, Environmental and Zoning Compliance. We are moving from physical walls to invisible hazards.
You see, Ibn al-Rami didn't just care about bricks and mortar. He categorized architectural nuisances almost exactly like modern EPA guidelines and local noise ordinances. He heavily restricted things like exhaust and smoke from commercial ovens, awful odors from open latrines or tanneries, severe vibrations from blacksmiths, and choking dust from agricultural sifting in residential zones.
But notice how he brilliantly distinguished between different types of the exact same element. Necessary everyday cooking smoke? Well, that was considered an acceptable household reality. It was low risk and customary. But high-risk industrial exhaust from a commercial bathhouse or a massive kiln, that was considered an actionable nuisance. He fully recognized that heavy industry required modern equivalent ventilation clearances, and you just couldn't dump toxic smoke into a neighborhood.
Looking at the original manuscript again, the rulings explicitly mandate that high-risk industrial ovens or exposed latrines absolutely must be covered, isolated, or completely removed if continuous harm to neighbors is proven. If your business was causing chronic respiratory issues or unbearable smells for the people living next door, you basically had three choices: fix it, move it, or shut it down.
And it goes even deeper. Even noise and vibrations from grain mills or blacksmithing weren't just seen as annoying sounds.
They were actually graded as high-risk structural threats. Why? Well, because constant, heavy shaking could literally rattle the mortar right out of adjacent load-bearing walls over time. Ibn Al-Rami basically viewed chronic vibration as a slow-motion demolition of the neighbor's house.
Section 4. Privacy as a building code. This is where things get really fascinating.
In this legal framework, visual privacy is treated with the exact same engineering severity as physical structural damage. A person's home was a sanctuary. Opening a new window or raising a roofline that created a direct sightline into a neighbor's private courtyard was considered an actionable high-risk harm. It was treated literally just like a physical trespass. Now, old or pre-existing sightlines were often grandfathered in since people had already adapted, but newly built invasions of visual privacy were strictly prevented or ordered to be boarded up.
Finally, Section 5, the final code. Let's wrap up our site inspection.
We've looked at walls, smoke, vibrations, and privacy, and everything we've discussed today is anchored by this one golden rule, a famous legal maxim in Islamic jurisprudence, la darar wa la dirar, which translates to no harm and no reciprocating harm. This wasn't just some vague moral suggestion. It acted as the ultimate, enforceable urban building code. You cannot initiate harm through your construction, and you definitely cannot retaliate with a harmful build of your own.
This golden rule builds into 4 incredibly practical guidelines for urban living. First, establishing that baseline safety, no harm. Second, penalizing new hazards. If you build something new that causes damage, you're liable. Third, tolerating minor friction. A little bit of cooking smoke is just part of living in a city. And fourth, prioritizing communal well-being. You own your home, for sure, but you do not own the right to turn it into a danger zone for your community.
As we close this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. Look at how a 14th-century mindset, one that balanced technical engineering with a profound respect for the community next door, might just be the key to designing more harmonious, sustainable cities today. Are our current zoning laws missing this deeply human element? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see a new building going up in your neighborhood. Thanks so much for joining me on this site inspection, and keep learning.